You may have recognized from the title, I will be discussing the relationship between mental health and culture and arguing for the implementation of culture across mental health support services. I want to preface that I am of Kashmiri background, so I will be exploring that side of the argument because I have personal insight of that culture. Also, there are many nuances to culture, and my external judgment may not reflect the same way someone of a particular culture can express their perspective, but I hope that my exploration will result in findings with broad applicability. I will also be referring to CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, and the person-centered approach to present my case. To start off, I want to establish the importance of this research. Expressed very concisely by Livingstone, within the social sciences, cross-cultural research is labelled as impossible yet necessary, with Chisholm claiming that this is because, quote, cultures are fundamentally non-comparable and cannot be evaluated against each other, quote. Livingstone explains that this can be due to the meaning behind a phenomenon in one area being drastically different in another. Therefore, comparing these phenomena from both locations would be pointless and lack validity. Stewart declares that one style of interviewing is not transferable across cultures to all clients, which connotes that therapy must also be tailored to the cultural needs of each client. This proves that applying Western ideology on practice involving alternative cultures is inherently problematic. Additionally, with dominant communities assuming that their understanding behind something is also reflective of other groups, the application of said understanding will lose validity for marginalized communities who don't share the same ideas. As counselling is ethnocentric in terms of it being based on white, middle-class culture, other cultures are alienated and misunderstood, says Stewart, while Healy adds that because we can never truly understand a culture other than our own, attempting cultural competence is an ongoing journey rather than a destination. According to Tomlinson, this increasing recognition for globalization is perpetuating further research on cultural similarities and differences. And as there is very little research on Kashmir as a country, there is very little known about Kashmiri culture and its place in mental health. A lack of research on culture can have detrimental effects on such minority communities. For example, Liang et al. Evidenced the possibility for misdiagnosis of mental illness within ethnic minority youths. To add to this, Dow also states that a failure to recognize cultural cues can result in misdiagnosed mental illness. Inappropriate questioning, misdiagnosis, and overdiagnosis are some of the effects that a lack of knowledge can have on ethnic minorities, as reported by Fitzpatrick. In contrast, Von Trest reports how integrating client culture within psychotherapeutic practice can lead to more beneficial outcomes. Stewart also states that the understanding of client culture and how it influences them could benefit counselling and increase multiculturalism. Here, we gather that culture can have a profound impact on the way mental health problems are expressed and understood, and it emphasizes the need for cultural awareness, especially of ethnic minorities. On this topic of ethnicity, my reference to culture is more inclusive of ethnicity rather than race, because the influence of race deserves a complete discussion itself. Ethnicity defined by Erikson is formed through, quote, aspects of relationships between groups which consider themselves and are regarded by others as being culturally distinctive, quote. Beckett and Taylor add that being an ethnic minority can significantly affect the opportunities someone has in life due to social exclusion or stereotyping. Ethnic minorities are also challenged on the basis of identity. This is because forming an identity with the majority, such as white or Western, while also staying true to one's own historical or familial culture is a complex and difficult task according to Beckett and Taylor. They explain that compared to people who fall within the ethnic majority and are considered the norm in society, you can see the weight and importance of considering cultural/ethnic background. In terms of practice, Stewart adds that ethnic minorities are also the least likely to make use of counselling services. Now, we understand that culture can have a significant impact on the way mental health problems are expressed and understood, and we have discussed the need to recognize the client's culture in order to facilitate more successful therapeutic outcomes. Then, what can we do to improve cultural awareness within practice? I propose that we first recognize the influence of client background and culture on the therapy itself before it's conducted. Within CBT, for example, The practitioner is the expert who has a strong understanding of CBT theory, which can help the client overcome mental illness, states Leishman. On the other hand, Murphy describes the person-centered philosophy of viewing the client as the expert who knows their own problems better than anyone else. Leishman argues that this personalization of services specific to the client holds paramount importance within the social sector, and that the person-centered approach allows service users to define the most suitable intervention for themselves, which differs to how the NHS system currently works. The NHS prioritises CBT as the primary model of treatment as it is easier to evidence and because the NHS follows NICE guidelines which recommend evidence-based therapies such as CBT or interpersonal psychotherapy, says Shafran. As shown in the treatment plan for common mental health disorders, you can see how frequently CBT is recommended compared to any other therapy. Unless a service user pays for their own service privately, the We Need to Talk Coalition found that it is unlikely that they will receive the therapy of choice, as only 58% of patients were offered a choice in service within the NHS's IAPT system from a report in 2013. Leishman emphasizes the need for clients to be able to choose a service privately or through the local authority in order to maintain a needs-led system, as in a system which caters to the personal needs of the client. Here, the client isn't given much of a choice because the system wants reliable, quantifiable therapy, with only a small percentage being provided with choice. A workaround for this could be to make the therapies themselves more universally applicable. This will of course not make up for the individual differences between therapies, but it raises the potential for client benefit. If the CBT approach is to be enforced because of its quantifiable efficacy, how can we tailor it to better suit the cultural needs of the client? According to Leishman, CBT is largely focused on the problem than the person, and it can be argued that person-centered focuses more on the person than the problem, resulting in CBT being less holistic in comparison. With that said, both models emphasize collaboration with the service user to reach an end goal. Collaborative empiricism is the CBT way of describing this co-investigation of the client's problem, while the therapist attempts to relate to the client's experiences as described by Murphy. CBT does not emphasize a specific way of being for the therapist, for it is more concerned with the client cognition and theory, states Murphy. Therefore, there is continuous discourse over whether there is a need for therapists to employ more person-centered techniques such as warmth, empathy, and genuineness, presented by Rogers, with many leading names arguing that these conditions aren't necessary for CBT. From this, we find a lack of mutual agreement for whether the therapist should empathize with the client on a relational level. This does not decrease the effectiveness of CBT. It does, however, propose the idea that maybe CBT could be even more effective if it utilized its research-heavy treatment methods with a more personalized approach to therapy. I suggest that we achieve this by employing certain person-centered skills within the initial discovery of the client's problem to focus on how culture plays into them, thus leading to culture-informed practice. I have explicitly discussed the position of CBT within this argument, but these skills should be viable across talk therapies. The skills or techniques I am referring to are those of relational depth within person-centered counselling. Relational depth is a state of deep connectedness with the client, which is best achieved by person-centered congruence. Best described by Migrants and Thorne, congruence on the therapist's behalf allows the client to trust them with sensitive information in order to achieve relational depth. Congruence is a state of being where the therapist doesn't attempt to put on a facade and instead remains transparent with whatever is happening for them internally. To do this, counsellors must first understand themselves. According to Hugh Vishnakansa-Dwamena, states it is necessary for counsellors to then explore their own biases and privilege to achieve cultural competence. Mians and Thorne explain how being true to themselves helps therapists tap into a sense of authenticity with their client, but the determinant to this is that the client must perceive the therapist as congruent for this to happen. This technique thrives on the connectedness of client and counsellor, which will create a sense of care to deepen the therapeutic relationship. The takeaway from this is that sincerity on the therapist's behalf can result in enhanced inclusion of the client for them to share their cultural values with someone they trust, which can then inform the way therapy is carried out. The goal here is to achieve brief relational depth when getting to know the client and attempt to understand the cultural implications of seeking help for the client. by asking questions around the significance of culture and remaining aware of cultural perspectives throughout the therapeutic process, the client's culture is given value. The emphasis is not on the way that culture is acknowledged, either objectively through behaviorism or subjectively using the humanistic approach as stated by Hugh. It is on the action of the acknowledgement itself and the therapist's genuineness per se. The fact that culture is being recognized is what could inform the practice in whichever way it's done. By dedicating a portion of the introductory phase of therapy to get to know the cultural perspective of the client, we can better understand them and their needs. An example of this could be, say, if a Kashmiri person came to me as a CBT practitioner with worries that the people around them do not like them, while getting to know the client, I could attempt to identify if there are cultural influences on the concerns that could be reinforcing these negative thoughts. After all, CBT treats the harmful cognition or behavior that is leading to the presenting problem by challenging irrational thought processes, states Hugh. If there is no cultural influence, that is acceptable because not everything will be linked to culture in some profound way. However, if there are links found to culture, instead of instantly trying to fix any negative thought patterns or behaviors CBT does, according to Lichman, the helper can take time to explore the cultural components that situate the client within their problem. This is what it means to be culturally conscious to me. Once the helper has placed themselves in the client's world, they can collaborate on the most effective way to use CBT methods to treat their presenting problem. Because we found through Murphy that collaboration is key to the CBT approach, this deep level of understanding will better inform the collaboration process through relational depth. What I mean by this is that culture should have more presence in therapy, as it may have more to do with the client's circumstances than we presume. The therapist's prerogative to be inclusive of client culture is on the forefront for informed and effective model of treatment. This will also demonstrate to the client that the counsellor is invested in them and therefore strengthen the client-counsellor relationship. As Means and Thornton declare, across the various counselling traditions, the relationship is crucial to the effectiveness of therapy. They also explain how person-centered counselling differs in that it not only recognises the relationship as important, but it focuses on maintaining it, as it cannot be pushed aside to focus on exercises or problem analysis as done in other models of therapy. If the relationship can be strengthened by exploring the client's cultural background to their problem, I don't see why it should not be implemented across the different approaches of therapy. I do want to state a potential drawback to this being the client's own discomfort in including their culture within therapy. If so, cultural integration can be postponed to further down the therapeutic process, or can be dismissed entirely if neither the client nor counsellor see it leading to anything useful. Although exploring this discomfort could also be beneficial, as it will allow the client to explore what makes them uncomfortable with their identity, which may then lead to a positive outcome in itself. Another drawback may be that this approach can be seen as a reinforcement of cultural differences. Livingstone emphasizes that similarities across cultures need to be appreciated instead of emphasizing what separates us. Wilkin and Beckett also claim that equality is greater when there are fewer differences amongst people in society, as evidenced in the way people befriend one another based on similarities. However, particularly to a therapeutic setting, Turner argues that differences in culture should be considered as therapy has been immune to the societal and political changes in the world. He explains that this is due to therapy lacking recognition for the dynamics of power of a privileged therapist, and that these differences need to be highlighted in order to reduce this sense of othering, which can lead to conscious or unconscious oppressive conduct. He goes on to state that we must work with differences that perpetuate our feelings of othering, as they prevent us as minorities from being our unique selves, just so that we can be seen as more acceptable by the majority, or in this case, the therapist. Cameron also states that this idea of seeing different cultures as other, to our own, can be stereotyping, and an oversimplification which can lead to the demonization of culture. I would have liked to explore this topic further, but alas, we can gather that perceptions of community or similarity amongst people can be beneficial in the larger scale political discussion, but within therapy, differences have been cast aside at the cost of the minority. Therefore, we must acknowledge the impact of our differences in culture to create a more cohesive therapeutic environment overall. I know that was a lot of information to take in, but I want to summarize this argument with the following bullet points. Firstly, Understanding culture is a necessary component to therapy as it constructs ideas around power, privilege, and conformity. Misunderstanding culture can have negative effects such as misdiagnosis or oppressive conduct. A way to implement culture is through client-counselor connectedness using congruence to achieve relational depth. Relational depth can lead to stronger, more productive relationships. And finally, acknowledging culture within the introductory phase of any therapeutic practice can result in beneficial outcomes for psychotherapeutic practice and achieve increased multiculturalism. I hope that I was able to demonstrate the need for increased cultural integration within therapeutic context, and I want to thank you for sticking through.